Hi, and thanks for stopping by my channel. A Square Pillow Isn't Square, where you will learn anything and everything you wanted to know about home deck sewing. Today's video is how to make a pillow cover or pillow sham with a mitered flange. This method is great when you want to use contrasting fabric on the flange, or if you want to set a trim between the flange and the main body of the cover. We're going to make it with an overlapping back, which is the closure method that I prefer with this style. There are several ways to fabricate this item, and I have tried them all. But for me, this way gives me the best outcome with the least amount of effort. As always, let's start with the boring stuff, how to figure out your fabric cuts. If you don't need help figuring your cuts, skip ahead to about the 5.5-minute mark in the video. That's where the sewing tutorial part begins. Once you understand the math, you can make this style in any size or shape using the same principles. For this demo, I'm going to use a standard bed pillow size, which is 20 by 26. First, let's figure out the front piece that will fit snugly around your pillow insert. If you're not sure how to measure for that, one of my very first videos is called How to Measure for a Pillow Cover, so check that out. I'll link to it here. I've determined that I want the body of the cover to finish at 20 by 26. So now all you have to do there is just add 1/2-inch seam allowances on all 4 sides. So in my case, my center front will be cut 21 by 27. Now let's figure out the cuts for the flange pieces. In general, this style works best if your flange finishes between 2 to 3 inches wide. I'll use 3 inches for my example. And don't forget to take direction into consideration when you cut your flange strips. You can drastically change the look of the flange by how you choose to cut your strips. Plaids, prints, stripes, or if there's a nap or a sheen like in a velvet. You want the direction to make the kind of impact that you want it to make, and you don't want things like flowers running sideways on your side pieces, so make sure you think of direction when you cut these pieces out. So here's my drawing showing the sizes of my cover. Let's start with figuring the lengths of the cuts. So here I would take 20 inches for my height. I'd add 3 inches for the top flange, 3 inches for the bottom flange. That gives me a finished height of 26 inches. Do the same thing for the width. You'll get a finished width, in my case, of 32 inches. Now add your 1/2-inch seam allowances on both ends of your strip. So our strip lengths are going to be 27 inches and 33 inches. 2 27-inch for the sides and 2 33-inch for the top and bottom. For the width of the strips, you just decide how wide you want your flange. In my case, it's 3 inches. And again, add your 1/2-inch seam allowances on both ends, so my strips will be 4 inches wide. So here is my center front cut for the body, and here are my 4 strips for my flange. Now let's figure out the cuts for the overlap back. I like to offset my overlap, not make it right in the middle, because it's easier to get a large rectangular shaped pillow into the cover if the opening is closer to one end or the other. It doesn't matter which end, but you can do it any way you want. Let's start with the height. We determined from our calculations on the front of the cover that our finished cover is going to be 26 inches high. The back doesn't have a separate flange, it's all one piece, so we just add 1/2-inch seam allowances to that number, and we will cut our back 27 inches high. The width's a little trickier because we have to add an overlap, plus some extra room to finish the edges of the fabric where it opens, as well as sew it into the seams. So let's walk through how to do that. In general, on larger rectangular pillows like bed pillows, I use a 3 to 4 inch overlap. In our example, we determined that we needed a total finished width of 32 inches. I usually divide my back into about thirds, so I will cut my smaller piece, in this case, about 1/3 of the total. As you can see, if you look at the top of this drawing, I've got 32 inches that needs to be my finished width. I'm going to split it up like this. 10 inches will be the short piece and 22 inches will be the longer piece. But remember, you have to add for your overlap to your long piece. So now I'm going to have a cut that's still 10 inches on the short piece, but I'm going to add 4 inches to that longer piece. I'm going to cut that piece 26 inches. But now we have to add a little bit more. Add 1.5 inches total to the width of each of those pieces. That will give you a 1/2 inch seam allowance where it's sewn to the front and a 1 inch allowance for a narrow double hem on the overlap edge. So my shorter piece will be 11.5 inches wide and my longer one will be 27.5 inches wide. And here are my 2 back pieces. I'd suggest marking your top and your inside edges with a pin because once you take them off the table, it's hard to remember which edge is which. Finally, time to start sewing. Let's start with the back pieces we just cut. You can press in a double 1/2 inch seam on your overlap edges, or you can just take it to the machine and roll it in as you sew. But finish the overlap edges by sewing close to the fold like this. Your finished overlap edges should now look like this. Now overlap the shorter piece on top of the longer piece with a 4 inch overlap, and you're going to pin all 4 points of the overlap and set it aside while we work on the front. All right, let's start the front. First, start by laying out all of your pieces right side up and make sure you like how it looks. If you cut something in the wrong direction or you've got a strip upside down, now is the time to fix it. Lay them out exactly how you want them to look. And next, mark the center of all sides of the body piece and the center of each strip where it will be sewn to the body. You can use a pencil, a disappearing ink pen, chalk, make a clip or a notch, whatever you like. All right, let's start by applying the top and bottom strips. Start by lining up your center marks and pin it in place. Now smooth the strip out so everything is laying nice and flat. And the next step is to measure in a 1/2 inch from the end on each side of the body piece and make a mark. Now pin the strip in place. Take it to your sewing machine and stitch these 2 seams with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, stopping and starting exactly where your 1/2 inch mark is. You should now have something that looks like this. Fold your top and bottom pieces out of the way like this and lay your side pieces in place. And just like before, start by lining up your center marks, smooth the piece down so the ends overlap like this. And if you measured correctly and cut correctly, the ends should match perfectly. You'll start and stop stitching the exact same way as before, 1/2 inch in from both ends, and when you do that, the stitching should come right to the finished edge of the first pieces that you sewed in place. After you sew the side pieces on, fold them back to check and make sure they meet exactly. You don't want a gap, you don't want an overlap, it should look like this. So now you should have something that looks like this. The last step to finishing the front is really pretty easy using this method. Let's start with the bottom right corner. To make your miter, diagonally fold the fabric right sides together like this so 2 adjacent edges line up. The strips should line up on both the long ends and the short ends should also line up. Now feel for the spot, unless you can already see your mark, feel for the spot where your pieces meet exactly at that 1/2 inch point and put a pin or a mark in that spot. And now draw a line from that spot to the outside corner. Pin it in place and sew it, making sure that you stop and start right at the spot you marked. Now, when you open up your seam, you should have a perfectly mitered corner. If you need to make a correction or an adjustment, now is the time to do that. Just repeat that process on the other 3 sides. Next, press your seams flat, pressing the seam allowances away from the flange strips, and press open the mitered corners. If you're using a lightweight fabric, you don't even need to trim the excess fabric off of the mitered area, but on thicker fabrics, you can trim them if you want to. Your front is now finished. Now just lay the front and back pieces right sides together and pin and sew around all four sides using a 1/2 inch seam allowances. When you get to a corner, make sure your needle lands right in the seam of the miter. Lift your presser foot, pivot 90 degrees, and then lower your foot and continue on the next edge. Now turn the cover right side out, press it from the back side, and now turn it front side up, and we're going to get ready to just stitch our border in place. Pin all along the seam where the flange meets the body like this. You'll sew right along the line where those two fabrics meet. That's called stitching in the ditch in sewing lingo. Make sure you sew back and forth a few times at each of the spots where the overlap edges are, because that's a stress point when you put your pillow in the cover. It needs some reinforcing in those spots, so do a good strong back tack where those overlap edges are. And you're done. Congratulations! You just made a pillow cover with a mitered flange. Please hit that subscribe button so you're notified when I post new videos, and check out some of my other tutorials. If you have any questions, please ask them in the comments section below and I'll get right back with you. Thanks for watching and happy sewing!